Good afternoon, Iceland. So, for this talk, I decided to bring a small story, a story about exploration, survival, and innovation. So, who here knows Ernest Shackleton? Okay, a few hands. For those of you who don't know, Ernest Shackleton was a British explorer, and he wanted to be the first person crossing the Antarctica. In 1914, he set sail from Datswile Island, South Georgia, and they moved into the Weddell Sea. And one of the aspects of his leadership was when they faced adversity and they got stuck. And on one of those episodes, he called his crew in a circle, and in a very dramatic scene, he took out his golden cigarette box and some gold coins and threw them into the snow and said that this is worthless here. And he did that because, from his background, he knew that speed beats preparedness. And he knew that in order to survive in that inhospitable environment, they need to be very nimble. And you might be wondering, what the heck does this have to do with technology or cloud or security? Well, Agile is the new iteration. And if you're trying to compete, you need to be agile. It's how companies position themselves. It's how you reduce your time to market. It's how you push new features by being agile. It's how you tap into innovation, on how you can quickly iterate on that, on some ideas, and test them, fail fast. Let's try this, it doesn't work, let's try that. And it also gives you the flexibility to try those, to experiment those. And if we look at what happened as a catalyst in order to bring this agility, we can see that a big component was brought in by the cloud. The cloud is the new horizontal. Let's take a look at the retail vertical. So retail is also using cloud because it allows them to do competitive analysis, right? It allows them to see what is out there much more quickly by using analytics. It allows also them to do real-time inventory. Why should I keep my stuff in the warehouse when I can do real-time inventory, just in time, supply chain management? And they're also trying to use machine learning and AI in order to manage the markdowns, which means that they get a bigger margin by understanding what is out there and how they can sell it. Banking retail is also normally seen as a very big industry that normally takes much time in order to move forward, but they are also adopting, they're also trying cloud. Oh, definitely, they are there. Because it allows them to, for instance, they are adopting blockchain in order to have that assurance. They are trying to move into the cloud also to get some real-time compliance. One of the aspects, and it was also brought here before by the speakers before, was also about that elasticity that the cloud provides. And it's something that the banking industry also uses, like high-performance compute. I want to do my risk modeling. Why should I invest in my current data center or invest more in CapEx when I can go into the cloud, have that elasticity, pay on demand, and then bring the results back in? Much easier. Let's look at another interesting vertical, that is the healthcare. Normally, they were very adamant, were very resistant in order to get into the cloud. But with recent developments, for instance, in compliance and regulation, with the HIPAA and the cloud providers also adopting that, they're also getting there. And it's a very interesting vertical because it's one of the verticals that will generate a huge amount of data. And who doesn't love data? And also consolidating that data silos that we have scattered all around. Like myself as a patient, I want to go to hospital A, hospital B, whatever, and so the doctors can have a consolidated view of what is my past historial. So this is a vertical with a huge potential in this area. And as we have seen, like last year, there's also been some advances in the AI capabilities. So this is why we can see that the cloud is the new horizontal, and it's powered by APIs. The language, what is under the hood, we target those APIs, we interact with those. And all in this creates the business efficiencies. It allows us to grow, right? We only pay as we go, there's elasticity, faster time to market, growth. More importantly is the integration. We can integrate internally with our service lines, okay? Let's put marketing having an API and consuming services from sales or from engineering, that kind of integration. Or externally with our partners in the retail landscape, why don't we open up the APIs to our warehouses or to our business partners? Have that kind of integration, reduce costs. And lastly, also the standardization that allows us to have, because if we adopt the same practices across the organization, it's much easier. It creates less fragmentation, right? If a service line A talks with the service line B, there's much less fragmentation because they are all adopting the same standard. And this is why the cloud computing came to make this accessible to everyone. I brought this slide, so a disclaimer to the statisticians in the room. I know that correlation is not causation, but it's a very interesting one. So this slide represents the search interest from people almost 20 years ago, and it shows you on the red line the cloud computing search terms, and on the blue line the machine learning interest, okay? And it's interesting to see that almost 10 years ago the cloud computing interest was peaking high, and it slowly stabilized, while machine learning has slowly started gaining traction 5 years ago. I myself personally interpret this as the cloud being that catalyst for the innovation, because now with the cloud providers, you don't need to have teams of data scientists. Well, it depends on what your use case is, right? But the thing is, those APIs enable you to have, at the reach of one button, those models that are used by the major cloud providers, where they invest a lot of money. They allow you to do that. So if we look from an AI perspective, the cloud came to bring, for instance, AI innovations in risk management. So for those industries that are government, banking, insurance, there are capabilities in order to identify if the risk profile is adequate or not for our organization. In the healthcare, like I was telling, like in December, a major cloud provider worked with doctors in order to create a new AI algorithm that now detects breast cancer with much accuracy that even ever before, actually saving lives. And from a predictive analytics perspective also, making sure that we can tap into that technology without having to do much effort, just using those APIs. So the technology is already here. We need to use it. Second story from Shackleton is one on risk management. It's a very interesting one. So when they were navigating down to Weddell Sea, they got stuck in the ice. And the first thing that Shackleton said, okay, let's just continue the voyage as it is. But when they tried to do that, they were trying to pull a 1-ton boat through those ice ridges. Maybe that was a bad idea. So they just decided to camp in a floating iceberg, as you can see on that yellow line. And they just drifted along. And what I want to highlight with this is that his leadership vision on how we adopt a new paradigm, or where we are faced with new technologies, but we need to be constantly risk assessing, understanding what we need to do next. Because we don't want to be on that slide. It's just that those companies made their best, but for instance, in the case of Tesla, there was a misconfiguration that allowed a bad actor to go in and mine cryptocurrency in a Kubernetes cluster. Lion Air, they also exposed information in a bucket that shouldn't have that information there in the first place. And Capital One, it was a combination of a vulnerability and misconfiguration as well, but it resulted on the breach of more than 100 million accounts, customer data. And this is because the cloud brings new challenges. It's not because those companies are bad. It's just because it's a new challenge. Like Shackleton, it's a new challenge. And those challenges is because people, the organizations are used to having this vision of the private cloud and our own data center. And when we are moving to the public cloud, we are effectively adding another layer, adding more complexity. Simple. So and in order to address that, we need to have the visibility, right? If we are trying to secure something, how can we do that if we don't understand what's in our current environment and what's in our new environment? And that's one of the challenges that we have and we need to also tackle. Also, the lack of expertise. We need to get people that understand cloud, but we should also complement that with our existing business processes. And one of the things that organizations don't get right at the first time or require a little bit more help is, for instance, understanding identity and access management. So let's take a step back and understand how it was done previously. So as you can see in that image, it has several tenants. And back in the day, I would want to have the physical security. So I would take my server, go into a reputable data center, would put it in a mountain, would put it in fences, security guards, cameras. Then let's go into a next layer, the compute. I will put my servers inside a cage so that nobody could access it. Then the network, I would segment it. I would create a segmentation zone for the marketing, for whatever. I'm just segmenting, then going to the next layer, software, creating authentication. But all of this is to have the confidentiality, integrity, and the authorization of the data. Our crown jewels, the crown jewels of the business, our data. With the cloud, this changes a little bit, because now we are having a piece, identity and access management, that covers those 3 layers. Now we are saying, okay, now this user, this group will have access to these resources, to this network. And that requires a mindset change from those people that are used to do things all the way. And this is also important because it requires integration. We need to integrate that either with our ID or not. We need to integrate this in order to have that visibility. There's also frameworks that we can adopt in order to make this process more robust. So for instance, DevSecOps is like how we release more features in our enterprise, but we take security as consideration. We take security from the ground up. So for instance, let's say that on the development part, our developers, why shouldn't they have security requirements from the start? Why shouldn't they start doing vulnerability scanning as well? And when it reaches the next phase, then why don't we do some patch management, log monitoring? And this is what normally is associated with shift left, which is just personally when you're trying to increase the robustness of your pipeline, but at the same time reducing the cost of those security defects. Because if a vulnerability is found to your farther right, it's much, much less expensive than when the security defect reaches production. Oh, then you'll have outages, then you'll have breaches, right? And it's making sure that the probability of something bad happen gets diminished. And you can do that by using a staging pipeline and then having small feedback loops at every stage that inform the previous stage. There's also another framework called SOAR, that it's how security orchestration can work. So automating security events. So coupling that with incident response and threat intelligence. Let me make this real for you. So let's say that last month, there was a Citrix vulnerability. So we know, and we having this framework in our environment, it allows us to deploy this, make sure that if something bad is happening either by a user, either in the network, it will be automatically detected and will be automatically remediated. And the best part is about the threat intelligence, because it has a feed that is constantly being evaluated. So those are 2 of the most common frameworks that we can use. And there's the third one as well, like using state-of-the-art security by design. So we all know that because of the cloud and our premises, we'll have a huge amount of data. And it's making sure that we have the tools to identify the needle in that haystack, to actually identify from that big logs what actually makes sense. Also, scrubbing data, we don't want data going to somewhere that we want the data going to that place, but we want to make sure that the data gets there as we want. So making sure that it's cleansed. And finally, about classifying the data. Because there's several types of risks, and we want to be able to say, okay, this is a high-profile data. It probably shouldn't go into the public exposure. So as we've seen, there's a lot of processes that we can use and a lot of tools that we can merge into our existing business to adopt cloud safely. But that brings us to the next point and the next story. So when Shackleton was trying to hire for his crew, he was trying to be very specific. He was trying to hire from a diverse background of people, but people that were on the same message as him. And that's how organizations should also approach it. Because culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker is right. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't address the culture, then your probability of success gets really diminished. And I've seen that with our customers. They are trying to do strategy and doing the digital transformation, the digital journey, but it's mostly focused from a technological angle. So if you can only take one message home, is that the cloud is there. There's benefits in adopting it. We just need to make sure that we are adopting it correctly, so that we are integrating our existing processes, complementing it with the technology that it provides, but also bringing the people along. Because we should be rethinking cyber risks, not, oh, how can my system be attacked? No, we should be thinking on, how can this attack disrupt my business? And in order to do that, we need to have this holistic view, not just be focusing on technology or process. We need to take the whole picture, talking with the C levels, talking with the operational teams. Everyone needs to be involved in this. So by now you might be wondering what happened to Shackleton. So after Shackleton they drifted along in that iceberg. They also did an open voyage through the ocean, and they managed to find an inhabited island that had penguins and seals so they could sustain themselves. So the majority of the crew stayed there, while Shackleton and the rest of his crew tried to reach a whaling post, and they managed to do that, but they were only rescued after more than a year being stranded on that island. But actually, he managed the impossible. He did that perilous journey, and he didn't lose a single life. Thank you.